jealous sister ruined my relationship, so I caught her cheating and exposed everything at her proposal party. I, 28M, never thought I'd be writing this. 3 years ago, my sister Sandra, 26F, did something that completely ruined my life, and I've been planning my revenge ever since. Now that I've finally executed it, I'm thinking about everything. Let me start from the beginning. 3 years ago, I was in a great relationship with my then girlfriend Kathy. We'd been together for a year, and things were going really well. I was even thinking about proposing. Kathy was smart, funny, and we just clicked in a way I'd never experienced before. Kathy and I met at a mutual friend's birthday party. We hit it off immediately, talking for hours about everything from our favorite things to our dreams for the future. She was a pediatric nurse, passionate about her job and always ready with a funny story about the kids she worked with. I was working as a software engineer, and she'd listen patiently as I rambled on about my latest projects, even though I'm sure half of it went over her head. Our relationship wasn't perfect, no relationship is, but we always managed to work through our issues. We were both committed to making it work, and I really thought she was the one. We'd even started talking about moving in together. But my sister Sandra, she's always been the golden child in our family. Whatever Sandra wanted, Sandra got. Growing up, this caused a lot of problems between us, but as adults, we'd managed to maintain a somewhat cordial relationship. Sandra is 2 years younger than me, but you'd never know it from the way our parents treated her. She was always the star of the family, valedictorian in high school, full scholarship to an Ivy League college, landed a high-paying job right out of school. Meanwhile, I was the underachiever who went to a state school and took a few years to find my footing in my career. I was happy for Sandra's success, but it was hard to always feel like I was living in her shadow. Every family dinner turned into a celebration of Sandra's latest achievement, while my own accomplishments were barely acknowledged. When I introduced Kathy to my family, I was nervous. I wanted them to like her, to see how happy she made me, and they did seem to like her at first. One day, out of the blue, Kathy broke up with me. She was in tears, accusing me of cheating on her with multiple women. I had never even looked at another woman, let alone cheated. When I asked her where she got this idea, she said Sandra had shown her proof, text messages, photos, the works. I was devastated. I tried to explain that it was all a lie, but Kathy wouldn't listen. She blocked me on everything, and I never got a chance to clear things up. I was heartbroken and confused. The next few weeks, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every moment of our relationship in my head, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. I reached out to Kathy countless times, leaving voicemails, sending emails, even showing up at her workplace once, not my proudest moment, but she wanted nothing to do with me. It took me a while to piece everything together, but eventually, I figured out what happened. Sandra had fabricated all the evidence of my supposed cheating. She'd used photo editing software to create fake text conversations and even manipulated some innocent photos of me with female friends to make them look compromising. When I confronted Sandra about it, she didn't even try to deny it. She just shrugged and said, "You were getting too happy." It was annoying. That's when I realized how truly spiteful my sister was. She'd ruined my relationship simply because she couldn't stand to see me happy. I was furious, but Sandra just laughed it off. She told me there was nothing I could do about it. Our parents, as usual, took her side. They said I must have done something to provoke her, that Sandra would never do something like that unprovoked. It was always the same with them. I tried to explain to them what had happened, how Sandra had fabricated evidence and destroyed my relationship, but they wouldn't hear it. My mom just patted my hand and said, "I'm sure you're exaggerating, dear. Sandra wouldn't do that." My dad was even worse, telling me to man up and stop blaming my sister for my relationship problems. That's when I decided I wouldn't let this go. I was going to make Sandra pay. But I knew I had to be patient. I had to wait for the perfect moment. For the next 3 years, I took my time. I pretended everything was fine between us. I even started hanging out with Sandra and her boyfriend, Thomas, more often. Thomas was a great guy, and I actually felt bad for him, knowing what kind of person Sandra really was. Thomas was everything Sandra supposedly wanted in a partner. He was successful, good-looking, and came from a wealthy family. But more than that, he was genuinely kind and thoughtful. He always remembered everyone's birthdays, was the first to offer help when someone needed it, and had a way of making people feel valued and heard. I watched as Sandra paraded Thomas around like a trophy, showing him off at family gatherings and on social media. But I also saw the moments when she thought no one was looking, the eye rolls when Thomas said something she deemed stupid, the impatient sighs when he took too long to do something. During this time, I threw myself into my work. I got a promotion, started earning more money than I ever had before. I even dated a bit, but nothing serious. I couldn't bring myself to fully trust anyone after what happened with Kathy. About 6 months ago, I noticed Sandra started acting strange. She was always on her phone, smiling at texts, and making excuses to go out alone. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was going on. She was having an affair. I didn't confront her. Instead, I started gathering evidence. I know it sounds creepy, but I needed proof. I managed to get photos of her with another guy, screenshots of their conversations. Turns out Sandra isn't great at hiding her phone passcode. The guy she was cheating with was a colleague from work, Robert. He was everything Thomas wasn't, brash, arrogant, the type of guy who thought he was God's gift to women. In their messages, Sandra and Robert would mock Thomas, calling him boring and predictable. It made me sick to read. Last week, Thomas told me he was planning to propose to Sandra. He even showed me the ring, a beautiful family heirloom that had belonged to his grandmother. Thomas was so excited, telling me all about his plans for the proposal and their future together. That's when I knew it was time to act. The day of the proposal came. Thomas had planned a big surprise party with all their friends and family. He was going to propose in front of everyone. Just before he was about to get down on one knee, I stood up and asked for everyone's attention. I revealed everything. I showed everyone the evidence of Sandra's affair. I explained how she'd ruined my relationship 3 years ago out of pure spite, and how this was karma coming back to bite her. The room went dead silent. Thomas was shocked. Sandra was crying, screaming at me to stop, but I didn't stop until I'd laid out every single detail. I showed them the photos of Sandra and Robert together, leaving a hotel. I read out some of their text messages, including the ones where they mocked Thomas. I even played a voicemail Sandra had left for Robert, telling him how much better he was than Thomas. After that, Thomas left, completely devastated. Sandra was sobbing, alternating between begging Thomas to come back and screaming at me. Our parents were trying to calm everyone down, but it was useless. In the aftermath, Sandra came to my apartment. She was a mess, crying and demanding that I fix things. She said I'd ruined her life, that Thomas was the best thing that ever happened to her. I just laughed and told her, now she knows how it feels. How could she do this to me, she kept saying. I repeated, how could you ruin my relationship with Kathy? How could you lie to her, make her believe I was cheating? Sandra had the audacity to look confused. That was years ago, she said. I thought you were over it. That's when I lost it. I told her exactly what I thought of her, how she'd always been selfish and cruel, how her parents' favoritism had turned her into a monster. I told her she deserved everything that was happening to her. She left my apartment in tears, and I haven't heard from her since. Our parents have been calling nonstop, leaving voicemails about how I've torn the family apart. They're demanding I apologize to Sandra, try to fix things with Thomas. It's been a few days now, and I'm thinking back on everything. Thomas was a good guy, and I did feel bad for him. But at the same time, I feel like Sandra got what she deserved. Update 1. It's been about a month since my last post, and a lot has happened. I want to thank everyone who commented and shared their thoughts. Reading through your responses made me realize that while many of you agreed Sandra deserved what she got, some also pointed out that I might have gone too far by hurting Thomas in the process. I've had time to reflect, and here's an update on the situation. First off, the fallout from the failed proposal has been intense. Our family is in complete disarray. My parents, predictably, are furious with me. They've been calling and texting nonstop, alternating between guilt-tripping me and outright threatening to cut me off if I don't apologize to Sandra and try to fix things. I've mostly been ignoring their messages, but I did respond once to tell them that I had no intention of apologizing and that if they wanted to cut me off, they should go ahead. That shut them up for a while, but they started up again after a few days. Sandra, on the other hand, has been quiet. After her initial meltdown at my apartment, she hasn't reached out to me directly. I've heard from mutual friends that she's a mess, barely leaving her apartment, not showing up to work, ignoring calls from everyone. Any guilt I might have felt evaporates when I remember how she laughed when she told me she'd ruined my relationship with Kathy. Speaking of Kathy, I received a surprising message from her about 2 weeks after the incident. She'd heard about what happened through the grapevine and wanted to talk. I agreed to meet her for coffee. Seeing Kathy again after 3 years was strange, but she looked mostly the same. I owe you an apology, she said. I should have listened to you back then. I should have given you a chance to explain. I was stunned. Kathy explained that after hearing what happened with Sandra and Thomas, she remembered how adamant Sandra was about my supposed cheating, how she had all this evidence. Kathy said it never sat right with her, but at the time, she was too hurt and angry to question it. Now, she realized Sandra was capable of some pretty awful things. We talked for hours, and Kathy told me about her life over the past 3 years. She'd moved to a different hospital, gotten a promotion, and even dated a bit, though nothing serious. I filled her in on my life too, avoiding any mention of how much her leaving had affected me. As we were about to leave, Kathy hesitated and asked if we could try again. Though part of me still cared for Kathy, I knew it wasn't the right thing to do. Too much had changed. I gently explained that it wasn't a good idea, and we parted ways with a hug and a promise to stay in touch, though I'm not sure if we will. Now, on to Thomas. A week after the failed proposal, I received a text from him, asking if we could meet. I was surprised, but I agreed to meet him at a local bar. When I arrived, Thomas was already there, drinking a beer. He looked terrible, dark circles under his eyes, unkempt beard. He barely looked up when I sat down. I owe you a thank you, he said, and a punch in the face. I braced myself, but he just sighed and took another swig of his beer. I'm grateful you told me about Sandra, he continued. I needed to know, but man, did you have to do it like that, in front of everyone? I apologized sincerely, explaining that I was so focused on getting back at Sandra that I hadn't thought about how it would affect him. Thomas accepted my apology, and we sat in silence for a while, both lost in our thoughts. As the night wore on, Thomas shared more about his relationship with Sandra, how he'd been planning to propose for months but kept putting it off because something felt wrong. He admitted that part of him was relieved that he found out before going through with the proposal. We talked more, and Thomas even asked me about my history with Sandra. I told him everything, our parents' favoritism and what she did to my relationship with Kathy. Thomas was horrified, realizing he had no idea who Sandra really was. By the end of the night, Thomas and I had formed an unlikely friendship. We exchanged numbers and promised to keep in touch. Over the next few weeks, Thomas and I started hanging out regularly. We'd meet up for drinks or to watch a game, and we talked about everything. One night, Thomas showed up at my apartment looking agitated. "Sandra's been trying to contact me," he said. She'd been calling, texting, and even showed up at his work once, begging for another chance. I asked him what he planned to do. Thomas admitted he was conflicted. Part of him wanted to hear her out. They'd been together for 2 years after all, but the other part of him knew he could never trust her again. She'd lied to him for months, maybe even years. The next day, Thomas met Sandra for coffee. He called me afterward to say he'd ended it for good. He deserved better, and he stood his ground, telling Sandra that her cheating wasn't a mistake, it was a choice she made repeatedly. Sandra didn't take it well. She alternated between sobbing and lashing out, even trying to blame me, saying I'd poisoned Thomas against her. But Thomas stood his ground, telling her that I had only revealed the truth. After that, Sandra spiraled even further. She started posting cryptic, attention-seeking messages on social media, clearly trying to paint herself as the victim. Our parents, predictably, ate it up and pressured me to apologize to Sandra and help her win Thomas back. When I refused, they threatened to write me out of their will. I told them to go ahead, I'd rather have my integrity than their money. This situation has made me realize just how toxic my family are. I've started seeing a therapist to work through these issues, and it's been helpful. I'm learning to set boundaries and deal with the guilt trips my parents try to lay on me. Work has been a welcome distraction. I threw myself into a big project, working long hours to keep my mind off everything. My boss noticed the extra effort and hinted at a promotion if I keep it up. As for my love life, it's been non-existent since all this went down. A few friends have tried to set me up, but I'm not ready. I need to focus on myself for a while. Maybe someday, I'll be ready to trust someone again, but for now, I'm okay being on my own. Thomas seems to be doing better. He started going to the gym regularly, saying he needs to work out his frustrations. He's also signed up for cooking classes, something he'd always wanted to do but Sandra discouraged. It's good to see him focusing on himself and his own happiness. As for the future, my relationship with my parents is strained, and I don't know if it will ever recover. Sandra, from what I hear, is still a mess. She's taken a leave of absence from work, and there are rumors that she might lose her job. I feel some satisfaction at that. Thomas and I are planning a trip for next month. It'll be good to get away from the drama for a while. In the end, I don't regret exposing Sandra's affair. Thank you all for listening to my story. If anything significant happens, I'll update you, but for now, I'm signing off to live my life on my own terms, free from Sandra's shadow at last. Final update. It's been a year since my last update, and I felt it was time to give you all a final update on how things have turned out. A lot has changed, and I'm finally ready to close this chapter of my life. First, let's talk about Sandra. After the exposure of her affair and the end of her relationship with Thomas, things got worse before they got better. She lost her job, partly due to her extended absence and partly due to the rumors about her personal life affecting her professional reputation. For a while, she moved back in with our parents. They coddled her, treating her like a victim and blaming me for ruining her life. But even Sandra couldn't maintain the charade forever. About 3 months after moving back home, she had a massive blowout with our parents. She finally snapped under the pressure of their expectations and confessed to everything, what she'd done to me and Kathy years ago. Our parents were shocked, forced to see Sandra for who she really was. It wasn't pretty. There was a lot of yelling, a lot of tears, and in the end, Sandra moved out. Last I heard, she's living in a small apartment on the other side of the city, working a retail job and attending therapy regularly. As for my parents, after Sandra's confession, they tried to reach out to me. At first, I ignored them, still hurt and angry about being treated as second best for years. But eventually, after encouragement from my therapist, I agreed to meet with them. It was an awkward meeting. There were apologies, tears, and uncomfortable silences. They admitted they'd been wrong about a lot of things, that they'd failed me as parents in many ways. I appreciated their honesty, but I also made it clear that it would take more than one conversation to repair our relationship. Over the past year, we've been slowly rebuilding. It's not perfect, there are still moments and old habits resurface, but we're trying. They've started showing a genuine interest in my life and career, and I'm learning to open up to them again. It's a work in progress, but it's progress nonetheless. Now on to Thomas. We went through with that camping trip we were planning, and it was exactly what we both needed. A week in the wilderness away from cell phones and the internet gave us both a chance to clear our heads. Thomas is doing well now. He threw himself into those cooking classes I mentioned, and it turns out he has a real talent for it. He's even talking about opening his own restaurant someday. As for his love life, he started dating again about 6 months ago. The new girl, Lisa, seems really nice, down to earth, and genuinely kind. I'm happy for him. Thomas and I are still good friends. We get together regularly for beers and to watch sports. It's nice having a friend who knows the whole story, who I can be completely honest with. He's become like a brother to me, the sibling relationship I always wished I had with Sandra. As for my career, I got that promotion my boss hinted at. The extra responsibility has been challenging but in a good way. It's forced me to grow and push myself out of my comfort zone. I'm proud of what I've accomplished and excited about where my career is heading. Now about my love life. After taking time to focus on myself and healing, I've started dating again. I met a woman named Nora at a work conference about 4 months ago. We hit it off immediately, bonding over our shared love of obscure sci-fi novels and terrible puns. Nora knows about my history with Sandra and Kathy. I was nervous about telling her, worried she'd think I came with too much baggage, but she's been incredibly understanding. She's helped me see that what happened wasn't my fault and that I deserve love and happiness just as much as anyone else. It's still early days, but things with Nora are going well. We're taking it slow, building a foundation of trust and open communication. As for Kathy, we've maintained a friendly but distant relationship. We'll occasionally like each other's posts on social media or exchange a quick happy birthday text, but that's about it. I think we've both accepted that our time as a couple has passed, but I'm glad we were able to clear the air and find some closure. Sandra and I haven't spoken directly in months. The last time was at a family dinner our parents insisted on having. It was awkward and tense, with Sandra alternating between trying too hard to act normal and shooting me resentful looks. In the end, we both agreed it was better to keep our distance, at least for now. Maybe someday we'll be able to have a real conversation about everything that happened, but we're not there yet. Looking back on everything that's happened over the past 4 years, it's hard to believe how much has changed. The anger and bitterness that drove me for so long have faded. I still think Sandra's actions were terrible, and I don't regret exposing her affair. As I write this final update, I'm sitting in my new apartment. I finally moved out of that place with all the memories of Sandra's betrayal. I'm looking out at the sunset. Nora is coming over later for a movie night, and tomorrow I'm meeting Thomas and Emma for brunch. Life isn't perfect, it never is, but it's good, really good. To those of you who followed my story from the beginning, thank you. Your support, your advice, even your criticisms, all of it helped me navigate this difficult period in my life. I hope that by sharing my story, I've maybe helped some of you too. If nothing else, I hope it's shown that even when things seem darkest, there's always hope for a better tomorrow.